On a Wednesday afternoon in the spring of 2023, a phone rang in a house in Columbus, Ohio. It was an ordinary phone, an ordinary Wednesday, the kind of afternoon where nothing happens and everything continues exactly as it always has. The woman who answered it was named Sandra, 49 years old, married for 17 years to a man named Thomas, mother of two daughters, owner of a small catering business she had built from nothing over a decade. She was standing in her kitchen when the call came in. She had flour on her hands from the bread she was making. She almost did not answer because she did not recognize the number. She almost let it go to voicemail. She almost continued making the bread and never knew. But she answered. And the person on the other end of that call was a woman named Patricia. And what Patricia said to Sandra in the next 4 minutes did not just end a marriage. It ended two marriages, two households, two complete versions of the same man. 11 years of architecture built on the foundation of a single decision made in a parking lot in Dallas, Texas in the autumn of 2012. And when Sandra put the phone down and stood in her kitchen with flour still on her hands and the bread still half made and her entire understanding of the last 17 years rearranging itself, like furniture being dragged across the floor of her mind, she said one thing out loud to the empty room. She said, "How did I not know?" And that question, that single question, is the one this entire story is built around. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Three questions. Three questions that by the time this story ends, you will have the full and deeply uncomfortable answers to. Question 1. How does a man maintain two complete and separate lives for 11 years without a single person in either life ever finding out? Not a friend, not a colleague, not a family member, not one person in two entire worlds. For 11 years. Question 2. What does the psychology research tell us about the kind of man who is capable of this? Not the monster version of this story, not the villain, but the real human being, the one who woke up every morning and chose this, and chose it again, and chose it 4,000 times in 11 years. What was happening inside his mind? Question 3. And this is the one that will stay with you after the video ends. What does it mean that the people who love us most can be the people who know us least? What does Thomas's story tell us about the version of ourselves that we present to the world and the version that lives in the dark and quiet parts we never let anyone see? These are not comfortable questions, but they are true ones. And the dopamine arc does not tell comfortable stories. It tells the true ones. Thomas Edward Calloway was born in 1969 in a small town called Meridian in Mississippi. The third of four children in a working-class family where his father worked the railroad and his mother cleaned houses for the families on the north side of town. Thomas was by every account the golden child, not in the spoiled sense, in the genuine sense. The child who made the teachers remember him. The child who ran faster and read more and stayed later to help clean up after school events because somebody needed to, and he was always the one who noticed. His high school football coach described him in a local newspaper interview years later as the most self-disciplined young man he had ever coached. That word, self-discipline, will come back more than once. Thomas won a partial academic scholarship to Mississippi State University, where he studied business administration and graduated in the top 15% of his class. He was not the most brilliant student in the room. He was the most consistent. The one who never missed a deadline, never left anything half-finished, never let anything slip. He moved to Dallas, Texas in 1993 at the age of 24 with $300 and a used car and a contact name of a man who might have a job opening in commercial real estate. The contact came through. The job was real, and Thomas Calloway began building the first version of his life. He met Sandra in 1997 at a company Christmas party. She was there as the plus one of a colleague who left early. Sandra stayed. Thomas noticed. By every account of people who were there that night, the attraction between them was immediate and mutual, and slightly embarrassing in its obviousness. Sandra later told a close friend that she had never in her life made a decision so quickly. Thomas was steady, warm, funny in the way that quiet people are funny when they finally decide to be. He called her the next morning. They were engaged 18 months later, married in June 1999 in a ceremony in Dallas that his mother attended wearing a dress she had saved 3 months to buy. Their first daughter, Emily, was born in 2001. Their second daughter, Grace, in 2004. Thomas moved up steadily in commercial real estate through the early 2000s. By 2008, he was managing a mid-sized portfolio of commercial properties across Texas and Oklahoma. He was not rich, but he was stable, reliable, the kind of man who showed up every time. No exceptions. And everyone who knew Thomas Calloway in Dallas in 2008 would have told you the same thing. This is a man who has his life together. This is a man who knows who he is. This is a man who will not surprise you. They were wrong. But they were not wrong about the facts. They were wrong about what the facts meant. Here is something that the psychological research tells us about men like Thomas. And I want you to sit with this because it is going to matter for everything that comes later. At the heart of many double lives lies a primal, almost universal human emotion, the fear of rejection or judgment. And individuals often adopt a duality to fulfill various psychological needs, including a yearning for escapism, a thrill for deception, or an outlet for unfulfilled desires. But here is the part the research does not say loudly enough. The men most likely to build a double life are not the men who have nothing. They are the men who have everything and have built it so carefully and maintained it so precisely that the weight of being that person every single day has become a form of suffocation so gradual and so complete that they cannot feel themselves breathing anymore. Thomas Calloway had everything, and somewhere around 2008, the everything had started to feel like a cage so well furnished that most people would not believe you if you described it as a cage at all. The business trip started in 2009. Commercial real estate meant travel. It always had. Oklahoma City, Houston, Atlanta, Louisville. The trips were real. The work was real. But somewhere in 2009, something else began. Thomas has never given a full public account of what happened. What is known comes from court documents, from interviews Sandra gave to a Columbus, Ohio journalist in 2024, and from the account of Patricia herself, who spoke at length to that same journalist. What is known is this. In the autumn of 2009, Thomas was in Columbus, Ohio for a 3-day commercial real estate conference. He met a woman named Patricia Green at a networking dinner on the second night. Patricia was 34 years old at the time, a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm. Divorced. One son named James, who was 7 years old. She was funny and direct and not at all impressed by the things that usually impressed people about Thomas, which was the first thing that surprised him about her. They talked for 4 hours at that networking dinner. He did not tell her he was married, not that night. He told himself he would. He told himself it was just conversation. He told himself that the plane back to Dallas would take him home. And that would be that. He took the plane. He went home. He sat at dinner with Sandra and Emily and Grace on a Thursday evening, and everything was the same as it always was. And then on Friday morning, he called Patricia. He told her on the third phone call that he was married, that he had 2 daughters. He told her he did not know why he was calling. Patricia told him she did not know why she was answering. She told him she was not the kind of woman who did this. He told her he was not the kind of man who did this. They were both telling the truth, and they were both already doing it. There is a specific moment in the construction of a double life where the architecture becomes load-bearing, where the lie is no longer just a lie but a structure that the truth would collapse if it were removed. Thomas and Patricia reached that moment somewhere in the first 6 months. He had told her enough. She had accepted enough. The cost of honesty had risen past the point where either of them could afford to pay it. And so instead of paying it, they did something else. They built around it. Thomas began making more trips to Columbus. The commercial real estate market in Columbus was genuinely growing. The trips were professionally justifiable. Sandra had no reason to question them. Patricia knew the situation. She had made her peace with it in the way that people make peace with things they know are wrong by simply not looking at them directly. By 2012, something had changed that neither of them had fully anticipated. Patricia told the journalist that she had not planned to fall in love. that she had told herself from the beginning that this was a contained thing, a separate chapter, something that existed between the phone calls and the hotel rooms and the Columbus trips, and had no right to expect more than that. But by 2012, she was in love with Thomas. And Thomas, by his own later admission in a letter Sandra found after the phone call, was in love with Patricia too. And this is where the story stops being about deception and starts being about something much harder to understand. Because it is relatively easy to condemn a man who is using two women for his own gratification. It is much harder to know what to do with a man who genuinely loves two people simultaneously and has spent 11 years building two lives, because he could not bear to lose either one. That does not make what Thomas did right. Nothing about this story is right, but it makes it human. And the human version of this story is the one worth understanding, because the human version is the one that reveals something about all of us. In 2013, Patricia's son James turned 11 years old. Thomas had been present for most of his birthdays. James called him Tom, not Dad. But Tom, in the way a boy says, the name of a man who has been consistently present and kind and there. Who coaches his Little League team on the Saturdays? Thomas is in Columbus. Who helps with the homework that Patricia cannot figure out because Patricia was never strong in mathematics, and Tom always is. Thomas bought Patricia a house in Columbus in 2014. Not in his name. Arranged through a shell company he created specifically for the purpose. He was meticulous. He was precise. He was the same self-disciplined man his football coach had described in that Mississippi newspaper 40 years earlier. Only now the self-discipline was being applied to the maintenance of a structure so complex and so fragile that even he did not fully understand how it was still standing. Back in Dallas, Sandra was building her catering business. Emily was in high school. Grace was in middle school. Thomas came home every time he said he would. Never missed a birthday. Never missed a school play. Never missed a Sunday dinner. Sandra told the journalist that looking back, she could identify moments where something had felt slightly off. A phone left face down on the counter. A trip that ran a day longer than expected. A distraction she had attributed to work stress that she now understood was something else entirely. But she also told the journalist something more important than the red flags she had missed. She told him that she had not missed them because she was naive. She had missed them because she had trusted Thomas completely, and trust is not a failure of intelligence. Trust is the foundation of love. And when someone betrays your trust, they are not exposing your stupidity. They are betraying something sacred. Sandra said that twice in the interview. Trust is not stupidity. She needed to say it twice, because she had spent a year after the phone call trying to convince herself otherwise. Now here is where the neuroscience of what Thomas was doing becomes as important as the story itself. Because what Thomas was doing to his own brain over 11 years was not without consequence. Compartmentalization recruits the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus, and the amygdala to maintain separate identity systems, creating measurable cognitive load that compounds over time. And chronic compartmentalization of conflicting self-representations produces cumulative cognitive load that erodes executive function across domains unrelated to the concealed identity. In plain language, the brain was not designed to hold two complete lives simultaneously without paying a price. And Thomas was paying it. By 2016, he was sleeping 4 to 5 hours a night. He had developed a persistent low-grade anxiety that he managed with alcohol. 2 or 3 drinks every evening that had become as automatic as brushing his teeth. His blood pressure was elevated. His doctor in Dallas had told him twice to reduce his stress levels without knowing what the stress levels were or where they were coming from. Thomas told no one. He managed it the way he managed everything, with precision and silence and the particular stubbornness of a man who has decided that the only option is to keep going. In 2017, something happened that Thomas did not plan for. Patricia became pregnant. She was 42 years old. It was not planned by either of them. It was not something either of them had a protocol for, because neither of them had ever allowed themselves to build a protocol for a future that involved more than the present arrangement. Patricia told Thomas in a phone call on a Tuesday morning in March. Thomas was sitting in his car in the parking garage of his Dallas office building. He sat in that car for 40 minutes after the call ended without moving. What he was thinking in those 40 minutes, nobody knows. What he did next is documented. He drove to his office. He attended 3 meetings. He responded to 14 emails. He called Patricia back at 6 in the evening and told her that he would be there, that he would figure it out, that she was not alone. And then he drove home to Sandra and had dinner with his family and did not say a word. The baby was a boy. They named him Daniel. He was born in November 2017. Thomas was in the delivery room. He flew back to Dallas the next morning. He attended Grace's school play that afternoon. He sat in the 3rd row and applauded when his daughter took her bow and smiled away. Fathers smile at daughters they are proud of. And nobody in that auditorium knew that 12 hours earlier he had watched another child take his first breath in a hospital in Columbus, Ohio. This is the moment in Thomas's story where the psychological weight of what he was carrying becomes almost incomprehensible. Keeping secrets forces the brain into a constant state of stress. Psychologists have long documented that deception creates anxiety, increases stress, and leads to physical symptoms like insomnia, headaches, and high blood pressure. And for someone maintaining a full double life, every interaction becomes a performance requiring constant management of identity. Thomas had a newborn son in Columbus and 2 teenage daughters in Dallas. He had a wife who trusted him completely and a partner who had given 11 years of her life to a situation that had no name and no future. He had a mortgage in Dallas and a house in Columbus. He had a life coach in one city and a doctor in another, and friends in both places who each knew a completely different man. He had been living in a cognitive state of sustained emergency for 8 years, and he had 3-month-old son, and he was still not going to stop. Because stopping meant choosing, and choosing meant losing. And the thing Thomas Calloway could not do, the thing that the psychological architecture of his double life had been built specifically to avoid, was losing either of the lives he had built. The years between 2017 and 2022 were the most expensive of Thomas's life. Not financially, although financially they were significant, but psychologically. The alcohol had become 3 drinks a night and then 4. The insomnia had become chronic. He had started seeing a therapist in Columbus in 2019, a decision that Patricia had encouraged. He told the therapist about his anxiety and his sleep, and his sense of being trapped inside a life that was too big for him. He did not tell the therapist about Dallas. The therapist later said, in a professional context, that this was the most significant example she had encountered of what the clinical literature calls selective disclosure, telling the truth about the symptoms while completely concealing the cause. Thomas was not lying to his therapist. He was simply not telling her the part that would have explained everything. The part that was everything. In 2022, James turned 20 years old, Patricia's son, the boy who called Thomas Tom. James had grown into a young man who was quiet and perceptive in the way that children of complicated situations sometimes are. He had always known that Tom was not present, the way a father is present, that there were weeks of absence followed by weeks of intensity, that Tom never stayed for Christmas, that there were phone calls Tom took in other rooms and came back from with his expression slightly altered. James had never asked directly. Children often do not ask the questions they most need answered, because some part of them understands that the answer will cost them something they are not ready to pay. But in the autumn of 2022, James asked his mother directly. He sat across from Patricia at the kitchen table of the Columbus house that Tom had bought, and he said, "Does he have another family?" Patricia told the journalist that she had been preparing for that question for 9 years, that she had rehearsed answers in the shower and on her commute and in the quiet of the house after James had gone to sleep, that when the moment came she looked at her son for a long time and then she said, "Yes, just that, yes." And James nodded slowly in the way young men nod when something they already suspected has been confirmed. And then he asked the question Patricia had not prepared for. He asked, "Does he love us?" And Patricia said, "Yes, I believe he does." And James was quiet for a very long time. And then he said, "That makes it worse. That makes it worse." 4 words that carry more psychological precision than anything else in this entire story. Because James, at 20 years old, had understood something that takes most adults decades to articulate. That love without wholeness is not a gift. It is a form of withholding dressed as generosity. That being loved by someone who is also fully present somewhere else is not the same as being loved by someone who is fully yours. That the half of Thomas they had was not enough, even though it was real, even though it was genuine, even though by every measure of his behavior in Columbus, Thomas Calloway was a devoted and caring presence in the lives of Patricia and James and little Daniel. The half was real, and the half was not enough. And the knowing that the other half existed somewhere in Dallas, with another woman and 2 other daughters, made everything Thomas had given them feel different. Not false, but fractured. And fractured things, no matter how carefully they are held, cut the people holding them. Patricia sat with James's words for 6 months. She told the journalist that she had been planning to call Sandra since before Daniel was born in 2017, that she had picked up the phone more times than she could count and put it back down, that she had written letters she never sent and emails she never finished, that she had told herself it was not her place, that she had told herself Sandra was better off not knowing, that she had told herself many things over 11 years that were not true but were necessary for her to continue living inside the situation she had chosen. But after that conversation with James, she stopped telling herself those things. Not immediately. The call did not come for another 6 months. But the decision was made at that kitchen table when her son said those 4 words. That makes it worse. The call came on a Wednesday in the spring of 2023. Patricia had Thomas's home number. She had looked it up years ago and never used it. She used it now. Sandra answered on the 3rd ring with flour on her hands from the bread she was making. Patricia told her name. She told her she had been with Thomas since 2009. She told her about the Columbus house. She told her about James. She paused for what Sandra later described as the longest 3 seconds of her life. And then she told her about Daniel, 5 years old, Thomas's son, living in Columbus, Ohio. Sandra did not speak for a very long time. Patricia told the journalist that the silence on the other end of the phone was the most complete silence she had ever heard. Not the silence of someone processing. The silence of someone whose entire internal landscape has just shifted without warning and who is standing very still in the wreckage, trying to understand which direction is still north. Sandra finally asked one question. She said, "Does he love you?" And Patricia, who had asked herself that question more times than she had ever told anyone, said, "I think he loves both of us." And that was the end of the call. Thomas came home from a business trip to Atlanta 3 days later. Sandra was sitting in the living room when he walked in, not in the kitchen, not moving around the house the way she usually was when he came back from a trip, sitting completely still in the living room in the dark. Thomas turned the light on. He looked at his wife's face, and he knew. He knew the way you know when something you spent 11 years preventing has finally arrived. Not with relief, not with dread, with a kind of terrible clarity that he told the journalist he had not felt in over a decade. The clarity of a man who has finally been found. Sandra said 6 words to him. She said, "How long has this been?" Thomas sat down across from her, and he told her everything. Not a version of everything, everything. For 3 hours, he told his wife of 24 years the complete architecture of the 11 years she had not known about. The Columbus trips, the house, Patricia, James, Daniel, the therapist, the insomnia, the drinking. The 4,000 mornings he had woken up and chosen to continue. All of it. Sandra sat and listened without interrupting. When he finished, she stood up. She picked up her car keys from the table beside her. She said, "I want you out of this house tonight." And she walked out of the room. Thomas sat alone in the living room until 2 in the morning. And then he drove to a hotel and checked in under his own name. For the first time in 11 years, there was nowhere else to be. The divorce proceedings began 4 weeks later. Sandra's attorney described the case as one of the most procedurally complex divorces he had handled due to the financial entanglements between the Dallas household and the Columbus property. Thomas disclosed everything voluntarily. His attorney told him he did not have to. Thomas told his attorney that disclosure was the only thing he could still do right. The divorce was finalized 14 months after the phone call. Sandra was awarded the family home in Dallas and a significant financial settlement. She sold the catering business in 2024 and moved with Grace. Emily had already graduated and moved to Austin, to Portland, Oregon, where Sandra had a sister. She told the journalist that she chose Portland because it was the city furthest from Dallas that was still in the continental United States. She told him that was only partly a joke. Patricia and Thomas did not continue their relationship after the call. This surprised people who knew the story. They had assumed that after everything, Patricia and Thomas would formalize what they had built. Patricia told the journalist that she had not called Sandra to be with Thomas. She had called Sandra because James had told her that knowing was worse, and she had finally understood that Sandra was living in the same half-darkness that James had lived in. Knowing something without knowing it. Feeling something without being able to name it. Patricia told the journalist that she had spent 11 years accepting a half-life because the half she had was real, and that after making that call, she could no longer live with the knowledge that she had helped build the wall that kept Sandra in the dark. The call was not an act of anger. It was an act of conscience, 11 years overdue. Thomas entered residential treatment for alcohol dependency in July 2023. He completed the program in September. He is currently living in a rented apartment in Memphis, Tennessee. He has supervised visits with Daniel in Columbus and a slowly rebuilding relationship with Emily and Grace in Texas and Oregon. He has been in therapy twice a week since October 2023, with a therapist who knows the whole story, not the selective version, the whole story. He told the journalist that therapy with full disclosure felt like breathing after 11 years of holding his breath. He said that was the best description he had found for it. The feeling of finally being one person again, even if that one person had a great deal to answer for. James is 22 years old now. He is studying psychology at Ohio State University. He told his mother he chose the subject because he wanted to understand how people become someone they do not recognize. Patricia thought about that for a long time after he said it. She thought about whether he was talking about Thomas, or about herself, or about the version of herself that had chosen the half-life and called it enough for 11 years. She is not sure the answer is only one of those things. Sandra has not spoken to Thomas since the night she walked out of the living room and told him to leave. She told the journalist she does not intend to. She told him that she does not hate Thomas, that hating him would require a kind of energy she needs for other things now. She told him that what she feels when she thinks about Thomas is something closer to grief than anger. The grief of having loved someone completely and discovered that complete was only ever relative. That the man she loved was real, and the man she loved was also a stranger. And holding those two things simultaneously is the most psychologically demanding thing she has ever been asked to do. She is doing it. She is not finished with it. She does not expect to be finished with it for a very long time. But here is what Sandra said at the very end of the interview that I want you to sit with. She said that in the months after the phone call, when she was trying to understand how this was possible, she had done something she had not expected to do. She had read everything she could find about the psychology of double lives, about compartmentalization, about the kind of man who builds a parallel world and maintains it with precision and discipline for 11 years. And she said that what she found in the research was not what she had expected to find. She had expected to find a clinical profile of a sociopath, of a manipulator, of a man without empathy or conscience. Instead, she found something that disturbed her in a completely different way. The psychological literature on double lives describes not monsters but ordinary people caught between conflicting needs. The fear of rejection, the need for escapism, the exploration of identity. People who compartmentalize not because they feel nothing, but because they feel too much and have no architecture for holding it all in one place. Sandra said that reading that did not make her forgive Thomas. She is very clear about that. She is not ready to forgive Thomas. She may never be ready to forgive Thomas. But it changed the question she was asking. She stopped asking, how could he do this to me? And she started asking, how did we build a world where a man felt that the only way to hold everything he loved was to hold it in separate rooms and never let the rooms touch. That is a different question. It is a harder question. It does not have a clean answer. But Sandra said it is the honest question. And she has always been a woman who preferred the honest question, even when the honest question offers nothing comfortable in return. Living a double life typically involves deliberate compartmentalization, where a person presents one version of themselves publicly while hiding significant aspects of their private behavior, affiliations, or identity. And the longer the concealment continues, the harder it becomes to separate truth from fiction, not just for the people deceived, but for the person doing the deceiving. Thomas Calloway was not a man who did not know who he was. He was a man who knew exactly who he was in two different places and spent 11 years refusing to choose between them. The refusal was not courage, but it was not pure cowardice either. It was something more specifically human than either of those words can hold. It was the refusal of a man who loved more than one life and could not find a way to be honest about it that did not require him to destroy something real. He was wrong. The destruction happened anyway. The things we refuse to end on our own terms end on someone else's terms eventually. Always. Without exception. The phone always rings on a Wednesday afternoon when you least expect it. The flower is always still on your hands. And the voice on the other end is always saying something that cannot be unsaid. There are three people in this story who did not choose the life they were handed. Emily and Grace Calloway, who grew up with a father they loved and trusted, and who will spend years integrating the knowledge that the man at their school plays and Sunday dinners was simultaneously somewhere else, being a different father to a different child. James Green, who grew up knowing something was wrong and not knowing what, and asking his mother the question that started the chain of events that ended two marriages. And Daniel Calloway, who is 7 years old and knows only that his father, Tom, does not live with them anymore, and comes on scheduled visits and always brings the same kind of crackers that Daniel likes, because Tom always remembers that. Daniel does not yet know the full story. He will. Children always find out the full story eventually. What Daniel will do with it when he does is one of the open questions this story leaves behind, along with many others. What does Thomas's story reveal about the rest of us? About the ordinary people watching this who have never built a double life and never would. It reveals this, that the impulse to keep separate the parts of ourselves that conflict with each other is not unique to Thomas Calloway. It lives in smaller forms in almost every human life. The version of yourself you are at work and the version you are at home. The dreams you stopped mentioning because the people closest to you stopped asking. The needs you learned to not express because expressing them felt like too much of a risk. Thomas took that impulse to an extreme that caused real and lasting damage to real people who deserved better. But the impulse itself, the fear of being fully known, the choice of the partial life over the vulnerable one, that is not a stranger's psychology. That is ours, all of us, in varying degrees, on different scales, with different consequences, but recognizably ours. The bread Sandra was making when the phone rang was for her daughter Grace's birthday the following day. She threw it away that evening. She did not make another loaf of bread for 8 months. The first time she made bread again, she stood in her kitchen in Portland, Oregon on a Sunday morning with her sister, sitting at the table drinking coffee. And she made the same recipe she had always made, and she let herself think about the Wednesday afternoon in Columbus. And she cried, not for Thomas, for the woman who had been standing at that counter before the phone rang. The woman who was making bread for her daughter's birthday, and trusted her husband completely, and did not know that trust and knowledge are not the same thing. She mourned for that woman the way you mourn for a version of yourself that can never come back. And then she took the bread out of the oven, and it was good. And she sat with her sister, and they ate it warm with butter. And the morning continued, the way mornings do, regardless of what they cost. Before we go to the question I want to leave you with tonight, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We read every single comment on this channel. And if this story found something in you that you were not expecting, something about the lives we keep separate, and the people we are in different rooms, and the things we choose not to say, to the people who trust us most? Leave that in the comments too, because that is what this channel is for. Not the easy conversations, the real ones. Here is the question. It is a simple one, but simple questions are the ones that stay. Is there a version of yourself that the people who love you most have never fully seen? Not a double life, not a deception, just a part, a room you keep closed, a need you have stopped expressing, a truth about who you are or what you want or what you are afraid of that lives in you every day and has never been spoken out loud to another human being. If the answer is yes, and for most of us the answer is yes, then Thomas Calloway's story is not just about a man who built 2 lives in 2 cities. It is about the architecture all of us build to manage the distance between who we are and who we allow ourselves to be known as. The difference between Thomas and the rest of us is not the impulse. It is the scale, and the consequences, and the flower on a woman's hands on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon that was about to become the last ordinary afternoon of everything she had known. This is the dopamine arc. Stay curious, stay human. And next week, we are bringing you the story of a woman who spent 6 years building an entirely false identity online. Not for money, not for fame, but for a reason that the psychology behind it makes almost impossible to condemn. Almost. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss it. We promise you that one will stay with you too.